welcome everybody to yet another lecture of Shanghai Lectures in 2015 edition. Today the lecture will be hosted by the Berlin Humboldt University in Berlin. So the basic thread lecture will be given by Verena Hafner, Professor Verena Hafner from Berlin. And then we will have another interesting guest lecture by Fumiya Ida, of course, on morphology and the impact of morphology on the behavior of an intelligent agent. So I don't want to lose any more time, and I leave the floor to Verena. Verena?
So, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Global Virtual Lecture Hall. Today the Shanghai Lectures are hosted by us, by Humboldt University in Berlin. Can you please all switch off your microphones? Thanks. I'm heading the Adaptive Systems groups here at the Department of Computer Science, and for quite a while we're already participating in the Shanghai Lectures. You already saw a short introduction about Humboldt University in Berlin in the first lecture, so I won't repeat that. And today's schedule, basically, as Fabio already announced, we will have some short introduction, which is now, and then we'll have some remaining side presentations, but we'll move that to after the break. Then today's lecture is on the topic of evolution, cognition from scratch. And after the discussion and the coffee break, we'll have a very interesting guest lecture today on challenges and perspectives on morphology, changing robots by Fumiya Ida from Cambridge University, and that's our program for today. So we'll start with the main lecture today, evolution, cognition from scratch, and this will give you an introduction to the topic of evolution of artificial systems in the context of the embodied AI framework. So what we could look at here is first to see it from a broader view, to look at different time perspectives. So in the first few lectures, we've been mainly interested in the here and now, which you see on top of the slides. So dynamical systems, behavioral mechanisms, how agents behave in the real world, how they interact. But of course, there are also longer time frames. So if we go one step further to the center picture, we look at the ontogenetic perspective. So that means learning and developmental mechanisms during the lifetime of an agent, of a human, of an animal, agent. And so this we consider the whole lifespan from growing up until aging. And if we go at an even longer perspective, we are in the phylogenetic perspective, and that's evolution. And that's very long term, of course, can say up to millions of years in natural evolution. And here we consider different generations. So that's what we look into today, so the evolutionary perspective. And they have different levels of designer commitments if you try to put that onto artificial systems. So the here and now perspective is state-oriented, so basically you design everything by hand, and the new things emerge from the interaction with the environment. Then in the ontogenetic perspective, you basically design the initial conditions and the learning and the developmental processes. So that's what you have to consider. And then the third perspective, evolutionary phylogenetic perspective, there you have to design the evolutionary algorithms. You have to define how many generations, how big is the population size, what has changed, and we will see later what are genotypes, what are phenotypes, and so on. And for understanding of intelligence, basically all these three perspectives are required. So the three perspectives I mentioned now, and we have to see how we look at these. What are the designer commitments, and what is the relation to autonomy? So let's start with the first perspective, here and now perspective, and that's basically what we learned in the last couple of lectures within the Shanghai lectures. So just to put on two examples. On the left you see Simon's aunt on the beach, and we saw how this particular aunt interacted with this particular environment, which is a beach in that case, but there wasn't really any learning or any evolution considered in that context. And on the right side, you see some sketches of Rechenberg vehicles. So we will talk about these later on. Rechenberg vehicles are very simple reactive agents, where in this example they only have two motors and two sensors, and they are directly connected, and they behave in a particular way, but there's no learning and evolution.
Hello, welcome to the conferencing system.
Please enter the conference code now.
Okay, so that was a here and now perspective. Then next we have a look at the ontogenetic perspective in the center. So that's
Please
all
enter
about,
the conference code now.
About learning. So we both consider on the right side you see some picture describing human development. So basically how, in this example, how children learn to communicate, to interact with the world. In this example, they learn how to focus their attention on something and draw the attention of others by pointing to something. And this develops, these skills develop, they're not only learned, but the whole morphology of the agent is changed. So for example, the infants are growing, and then we can transfer similar things to robotics, which is in that case called developmental robotics, and to see how a robot could also learn these things that can be learned by humans, and consider this time perspective of learning and development. And we will see more of this in next week's lecture, which is on development. There we'll go more deeply into the ontogenetic perspective. So that's next week's main lecture. And this week we are going to have a look at the phylogenetic perspective, so evolution and cognition from scratch. So here we really start with looking at different generations and looking how intelligent behavior evolves over generations. One famous person you probably have all heard of in that context is Charles Darwin, and he invented evolutionary theory that all life on Earth was basically shaped by evolutionary processes, and today we know that all species of life have descended over time from common ancestors. And how does this work? It works by natural selection, so we have variation, we have selection, and by just these processes we can develop really interesting things. So that's what our evolution is. You see on this sketch here how it will continue with human evolution. So that's about natural evolution, but today's lecture will not be mainly about natural evolution, but about artificial evolution and how we can transfer these ideas from natural evolution to creating artificial autonomous agents. We will start with a short introduction of the history of artificial evolution. And basically, there are three main threads. So artificial evolutionary algorithms have been developed at the same time, basically independently by John Holland and Ingo Rechenberg. So the artificial evolution by John Holland was called genetic algorithms, GAs, and the ones by Ingo Rechenberg were called evolutionary strategies, ES. And there's also a third category by John Kosa, which are genetic programming. So here, programming structures are evolved. And look how we can exploit evolution for the design of intelligent agents using such strategies. We will have a look how they work. And because we're streaming today from Berlin, of course, we'll focus a little bit on the evolution strategies invented by Ingo Rechenberg. Ingo Rechenberg is a professor at TU Berlin, and he's very interested in bionics. You can have a look at the webpage here, some example of how evolution that shapes natural agents can also be used to shape different structures. So in bionics, you take inspiration from for example, the morphology and structures of bird wings and apply them to aeroplane wings, or from some animals in the sea and how they have this perfect dynamics, and you can transfer also that to artificial systems. So the original idea is very much to not only evolve programs, but also structures in the real world. And that's very closely related to the topic of embodied AI we're following here. And evolutionary strategies have been invented a very long time ago by Professor Rechenberg. You see him here on the left side as a young student. So that was already in 1964 in Germany. He worked at the university and developed some interesting strategy to change mechanical systems. And I'd like to show one of the first experiments here, which is called the fuel pipe problem. And so there are two pipes which should be connected somehow, and you want to put some fluid through. And the question was, how should this curve connect these two pipes that you can minimize turbulences? And so maybe that's a good question for the global lecture hall. So anybody has an idea how you would connect these two pipes to minimize turbulences? Maybe Plymouth?
Yeah, a curve.
A curve, yeah? What kind of curve? Maybe a quarter circle?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, quarter circle is the original solution for many engineers. So most of the pipes you see in your apartments or somewhere else, they use a quarter circle to connect those pipes. And what Rechenberg did then at this time, he asked the question, well, is a quarter circle actually the best solution for that? And he used a flexible connection here and used artificial evolution strategies, you can see here, to change the shape of this original quarter circle, and to see what is the effect for reducing the turbulences. So on the right you see the original experiment. So there were little things pulling on this flexible piece of pipe, and actually the curve you see on the left is already the optimal solution that the evolutionary strategy came up with. So to everyone's surprise, it wasn't a quarter circle, but it was more like a hunch. And this was the optimal form for reducing turbulences. So if you see the fluid coming from below and then going to the right, then some sort of hunch-shaped form minimizes turbulences. And so these evolutionary strategies solved really a real-world problem of minimizing turbulences in these pipes, and which of course was great for everyone, reducing costs and so on. Some other things where you can apply that are, for example, antennas for satellites, which were up to that time also designed by hand, by engineers, by humans, and it wasn't really sure what kind of shape should these satellite antennas have. And so also evolutionary strategies came up with really innovative new shapes for these antenna satellites that were so different from the original ones, or maybe were so unstructured, but of course better, that a human engineer couldn't have thought of that. And these evolved antenna shapes, they're now used by NASA, by the space agencies. So one could say that evolution comes up with some really creative solutions, more creative than humans could come up with. And I think we already had a look at this example, but I'm not sure whether we had the answer here. So that's a short test on your creativity. Try to connect the four corners of the square with 3 straight lines, ending up in the starting corner. You're only allowed to use 3 straight lines. Anybody has an idea?
We have one for Plymouth.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you can see it very well here, but you do a triangle, it goes up past the first corner, so can you zoom in? A bit roughly drawn, but...
Okay, yeah, so basically you have to think outside the whole slide here you see on the screen. So you have to, for example, take the first line, go up, but don't stop at the upper cross, continue, and then go down here to the right, and then go back to the starting point. So basically you have this big triangle which is bigger, which goes outside the slide we see here on the screen. So you have to think outside some given categories. And that sounds sometimes really difficult. But if you use an artificial evolutionary algorithm, then you're not restricted, because you just give a certain task, give a certain fitness function that what needs to be achieved, and you're not basically what you're not saying how the algorithm should do it, but just what the algorithm should do. And so the algorithm can explore the whole possible space and is not restricted. And I'd like to show you another example of what we can do with artificial evolution. So it's called cumulative selection, and it's an example taken from one of Richard Dawkins' books, which are actually a very good recommendation to read. So if you don't know any of these books, for example, there's The Blind Watchmaker and Selfish Gene and some other really, really good books, so you should read them if you have some time. And the example that he put up is about a monkey typing on a typewriter, and the question is whether this monkey can produce a whole piece of Shakespeare, for example. If this monkey eventually writes Hamlet, if the monkey is just typing random keys on a typewriter, but if you give it enough time, then eventually you will have the whole Hamlet written. And well, of course, this will take a very long time, and it will definitely take longer than the whole lifetime of this monkey. So the question is, how could we speed that up? And to make things a bit more simple, we don't take the whole Hamlet piece. We just take a particular sentence from a particular scene. So that's the Hamlet's dialogue with Polonius in some Old English spelling. Now, so take the sentence in the middle here, where Hamlet says, "Methinks it is like a weasel." So that's a short sentence with 25 characters. But if you just think about doing random typing, it will already take a very long time just by coincidence typing this sentence correctly if you put a monkey in front of the typewriter. So probably still longer than the lifetime of the monkey, even if he types not a day. Okay, so how can we put that into a genetic algorithm or evolutionary algorithm? We take cumulative selection here, create a generation of, well, basically agents, switch from monkeys to agents, who type a random sequence of characters with that length. So we start here, generation 0, just some random text typed by this agent. And what we do here, so we don't continue randomly, but we measure how good this sentence is already. So how close this sentence is to "Methinks it is like a weasel." And we take a very simple measure here. We just take as the distance to the target, we just take the number of characters that are already correct. So, and that's basically our measure. And then in the next generations, we favor solutions that are already a bit closer to the correct sentence. And so you can see if you go through these generations, distance to the target reduces, and after only 43 generations, we already have the correct sentence. So Methinks, it is like a weasel, is in that run of the in that particular program after 43 generations. But you can see even in other programs, it's less than 100 generations of continuing writing that sentence. And so you're much faster by using these kind of algorithms than with just purely random search. And you can try. There are many applets on the net. You can try and search for this particular program here. There's many implementations of that. If you have a look, for example, at Rosetta code, you can have things just like a weasel in your favorite programming language. Here, one example in Python. So it's a very short program, and you can see that it comes up with the correct sentence in a very short amount of time. So that was one example of why and how easily we can use these artificial evolution threads to reach some results here. Then the next topic is a bit inspired by breeding, and it's called Biomorphs. And this idea is that we use something like esthetic selection. So we don't give into our program, we don't give a particular fitness, which is defined by how close a solution is to optimal solution, or how fast a particular agent is, or how big or how small something is. But the selection is done by aesthetic criteria, and basically this involves an interaction between a human user, in that case of the program, and the program itself. So you see on the left some nice designs and drawings that are generated by the specific structure, and each generation of the evolution, the human is presented with a number of offsprings of its agents, and can select the most beautiful or the most aesthetically pleasing figure. And then from this figure, offspring is generated, like in real evolution. And again, the person can choose a particular drawing picture, and so on and so on. And after just a few generations, you can really create fantastic structures. And there are also two links to programs on the web, so you can maybe try one of these out and see what kind of art you can use here. We have the encoding of this creature. For example, we need a genome. So how is that encoded? What are the graphical parameters? For example, color, number of arms, angle of these arms. You can see here, and the most beautiful pictures are selected and reproduced. And that has been taken up by the surrealist painter Desmond Morris. Here are some of the works, and all these drawings here were inspired by these biomorph strategies. So now we're interested in how exactly this whole evolutionary cycle works. So the basic cycle for artificial evolution, as you can You can also look up again in the book how the body shapes the way we think. Explains that it starts with the genotype, which is the genetic information of how how everything is encoded. And there are different options for how exactly you encode the information of the agent in this genotype. So it could be binary, it could be integer, and real valued information. We will later see that there are also slight differences between these genetic algorithms and evolutionary strategies, so they're slightly different in how they present their genotype. And then we have, the next thing is we have an interaction with the environment. And that's really important that we have this interaction with the environment for the next step, which is development. So then from this genotype, the phenotype is developed, so that means all the shape of the agents, the morphology, where are the muscles or motors, where are the sensors, what kind of sensors, and other features of the agent, like size, other sorts of things. So that the phenotype is developed, also strongly influenced by the environment. And then we have this phenotype. The phenotype behaves in a particular way, and also interacts with the environment, and does some competitions as well. So the phenotype has maybe a particular task in the environment, the agent behaving in the environment, maybe also one agent is stronger than the other one, and at that point we do a selection. So selection is done by choosing the best individuals given a certain category. So we could have a fitness function here, or we can have this competition. And there are also different selection criteria. For example, you could have a roulette wheel method of choosing the fittest agents. So depending on some abilities of how fit they are, so the fitter agents are more likely to be chosen to reproduce. You could have elitism, so that you always keep the fittest agent within one generation and allow it to reproduce. And some other variations of selection. And then we have selected these agents from one generation. Then you can do, you need to do mutation. So you're mutating the genotype, so you're slightly varying the information from the genotype of these agents in order to create some variety, as we have in natural evolution as well. And what you could do, you could also do some crossover. That's only done with genetic algorithms. So if you have the genotype which is encoded in some string, so for human evolution, we have, of course, we have the DNA, and we have A, C, T, and G, and there might be some mutations and variations there. And crossover means that you take basically two of these strings, and use them to create a new offspring. Basically, you take a part of the first string and then part of the second string and combine them. And by doing that, then at the end, you have your new population, and the whole circle continues. So this is the basic cycle for artificial evolution, how you start with the phenotype, create the phenotype, create this new population, and have the whole selection and ability there. So let's take a practical example of let's start with evolving a neural controller for this little robot here. So that's a Capra robot, which is very often used in robotics for such experiments because they are quite small and easy to program. And this robot has 2 motors, and let's assume in that case we have 3 sensors, 3 distance sensors. And we will start with the classical approach. So the morphology basically is given. The arrangement and the number of sensors and motors is given. And also sensors and motors. And we also have some network connections which are something like a control structure for the robot, where the motors and the sensors are fully connected. And what we want evolution to do here is to only evolve the connection values between the motors and the sensors. Of course, in the embodied approach, we will later see that we were not restricted to just evolving these weights, but we also want to evolve the whole morphology of the agent and growth processes and other things. So the question is, what do we need to specify, given that we have these 2 motors, 3 sensors? We need to think about how is the encoding done in the genome. What could the behavior of this little robot be? What should be achieved? And how can we measure this achievement? So what is the fitness of this robot? And I'd like to give you that as a task now. So what we will do is we take a 5-minute break, where each of the sides has this task of thinking of an evolutionary process for this little robot, given this evolutionary cycle we just discussed, and come up with a solution and present it after this short break. So we have, let's say we take a break now and continue at 9:45 Berlin time, and whatever you're. You can draw it on a piece of paper, or hold it to the camera, or just explain it, and so on, and then we will see your solutions. Okay. So everybody had some time to discuss or to think of an evolutionary process for this little robot. So who wants to start with their suggestions and ideas? Maybe Madrid?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, our students have some suggestions for the problem.
Hello everybody. Well, first, in order to encode the data in the genotype, we could encode the sensor data and the output data for the 2 motors together. And then we could have a fitness function that takes those inputs and outputs and sees if that behavior, if given those inputs, their outputs are good or bad. So we can create a fitness function that is better when we are avoiding an obstacle, for example. Then, given that fitness function, then we can choose which are the better agents and complete the algorithm.
Okay, so your robot tries to avoid obstacles.
That's right.
Okay. Maybe some other solution, maybe Chiba University?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so for the genotype, I think it could be used 6 real values using one of the sensors to each of the motors. So in total we have 6 combinations. The development, well, in this case, depending on the goal of the robot, for example, if we want the robot to reach some point specifically, we can use as fitness value the distance from the goal. In the case that we cannot have that distance in real time, let's say only we can get the final output, it could be the inverse of the time that took the robot to go to the goal. The selection in this case, well, that will depend on the population, but probably roulette wheel is as good as any other. For the reproduction, I will say both crossover and mutation, obviously. The mutation and the crossover, it will be divided instead of in 1 point, in 6 points. So each couple can have 6 different kids. Yeah, that will be. The main problem will be choose the fitness values depending on what task you want the robot to solve. For example, to reach some point, the fitness value could be the distance to that point or the time that it took the robot to get to that point. If you want to avoid obstacles, as Madrid said before, it could be the distance to an obstacle also, and so on.
Okay, yeah, that's a great solution. Any other suggestions? Maybe someone had a very different task from that? Maybe Plymouth?
Okay, I think we had more or less the same solution as in Chiba. Do you want to add anything else, guys? No?
It's the same.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we also had a very similar solution than the Chiba University. Any of the others had a different solution? Okay. No other solutions? I guess, yeah, most people were probably thinking of having the robot drive a long way in a corridor or the longest way without crashing, which is a nice thing you can do with these robots. just a quick anecdote. If you're using simulation, of course, and not real robots, you also have to be careful. I once programmed an agent to drive in a virtual environment, which was restricted, and basically with the same task to evolve, to drive as far as possible without colliding. And what evolution came up with in my experiment is the robot went to one corner of the environment, accelerated, and hit the other corner with full speed. The simulation environment didn't detect that, and the robot just went infinitely with full speed. So evolution came up with a cheat, basically. So that's what you have to be careful, and that's also you can be really surprised by the solutions that evolution comes up with. Okay, we have here one example for the encoding that was already also mentioned. You have these, if you have full connections, you have 6 connections, and they have to be encoded somehow, and then you can do crossover and rotation and come up with the new generation. So we basically have different approaches to evolutionary robotics. So what we just saw in this example is we have given a specific robot and you just evolve the control, so which is some kind of neural network in that case. And in the embodied approach, you go further than that, so you co-evolve both the morphology and the control. And one famous example for evolving morphology and control are Karl Sims creatures. And Karl Sims came up with these creatures that are built of different geometric patterns in a simulation, and used evolution to evolve the morphology and the behavior of these agents. Nathan, can we play the video, please?
This demonstration shows virtual creatures that were evolved to perform specific tasks in simulated physical environments. Swimming speed was used to determine survival. Most of the creatures are results from independent evolutions. Some developed strategies similar to those in real life. Once they're evolved, multiple copies of these creatures can be made and simulated together in the same environment. The next group of creatures were evolved for their ability to move on a simulated land environment with gravity and friction. Some simple solutions with just 2 parts were found. Some seemed like they could use some assistance, while others were fairly efficient, such as this rowing-like behavior. Here is an odd cousin of the previous. A mutation caused him to tumble. Some creatures evolved to incorporate contact sensors in their control systems. Here is another inchworm-like creature that tends to go in circles. This was actually a creature first evolved for its ability to swim in water, then later put on land and evolved further. A successful sidewinding ability resulted. Here is one with a hopping style. The protrusions on its arms seemed to help prevent it from tipping over. This was the fastest, with a successful galloping-like stride. This group was evolved for their jumping ability. This group was evolved for their ability to adaptively follow a red light source. The resulting creatures are now being interacted with. A user is moving the light source around as the creature behaves. This one seems to flail randomly, but somehow still manages to approach the light. Perhaps it is mean to move the goal away just as it arrives. Here is one that has propeller-like fins which are tilted depending on the direction of the light. It can adaptively swim up or down very well. This final group of creatures was evolved for their ability to compete for control of a green cube. The creature closest to the cube at the end of a simulation is the winner. Here, a strategy first arose for simply tumbling towards the cube. Then one learned to block out his opponent. But then later one learned to overcome the obstacle by climbing over it. Some pinned down their opponents. Some covered the cube with protective arms. Others simply unfolded onto the cube. The success of a strategy is often highly dependent on the opponent. Here is a hockey-playing creature, which takes the cube away and wins by a large margin. Here are two similar hockey strategies battling it out, with appropriate gestures. This crab-like creature walks well, but often continues past the cube and instead seems to prefer beating up on his opponent. Against the arm, the crab seems to simply walk away. A successful strategy is this two-arm technique that swipes quickly in from the side and moves the cube over to a second arm. These are the final rounds of competition amongst the overall best. Finally, the seeker arm goes against the side swiper, but the cube is just out of reach.
Okay, so you saw some great examples of how we can evolve all these creatures with different shapes and without really designing them by hand. So it's just what evolution came up with. And what we have here, of course, in this evolution algorithm, that we have an encoding in the genome, and then we have some development. So this whole structure, morphology of the agent develops, and it is done by some recursive encoding. So you have these segments, and you encode how these segments are connected with other segments, and you can see on the right here how from these simple rules, these simple encodings, which is the genotype, you can create the phenotype, which is the structure of the agent. And there was a project several years ago, Golem project by Lipson and Pollack, and they did that not just in simulation, as we saw in the Karl Sims video, but with real hardware. So the robot consisted of bars and actuators, neurons with different length, diameter, and stiffness, and so actually a real physical robot evolved, and of course with some intervention by the human, but basically the whole morphology and structure of the robot was generated with artificial evolution. And I think I'm running out a bit of time, but I just want to show you some other example of how we can not only evolve the controller, but also the structure. And that's some work of Josh Bongard. There are already there is a recorded guest lecture of Josh, so if you're interested, you can just have a look at it. It's linked from the Shanghai Lectures website. And here, some genetic regulating networks were used to encode the structure and growth processes of this agent. So there's it starts with some simple element, and then with this specific network and a specific structure is created, and here also a task is given to the robot, which is then translated into a fitness value, which is in this example how far this block can be pushed, and maybe we just show one of these videos. Maybe we'll just start with the first one. So you see here how the agent grows, and when it is fully developed, it can move towards this block and tries to push it. So these are the first attempts of the agent. Maybe we can still show the second video. That's in a further stage of the evolutionary process. So now the agent has been evolved to grow some more mass, some more mass, and now can more easily push this block away. And evolution came up with this strategy by itself, so nothing was pre-programmed here. So what has been shown here, that the locomotion can be evolved, the size, and also some repeated structures. And to mention at the end of the first lecture here that, of course, you can't really look at evolution separately, but all these time scales, they are really tightly intertwined, and maybe in recent years people looked at combinations of evolution and learning and how they influence each other. For example, there are recent works by on multi-objective optimization. That's a sketch from Jean-Baptiste Mouret, where Pareto optimal solutions are evolved, and so both a particular fitness is used, but also evolution optimizes for behavioral diversity. So not just in the genotype space we have diversity, but also in the behavior space we want to create diversity. And there's some strategy called multi-objective optimization, which do that. And another very recent research topic by Jeff Clune and others is the evolution of modularity. So that was some recent work 2 years ago, and it has been shown that that modularity is probably a byproduct from a selection to reduce the connection costs in a network. So if we have this additional criteria to reduce the connection in this network which controls the agent here, then some modularity within this network structure is evolved. And what they showed as well is that the stability when changing the environmental conditions is improved when you have these modular networks as we have in natural systems, just by reducing the connection costs as an additional factor. Right. I wanted to show a video on that, but maybe you can look at this by yourselves. You can find that on YouTube, and then we finish with the lecture on evolution today, cognition from scratch. Tasks for next week: please read the chapter 6 in the book, How the Body Shapes the Way We Think. So chapter 6 is on evolution and basically repeats what we learned today. And we're still also looking for student presentations, so on certain topics. So please let us know and volunteer if you have any topic related to embodied AI to present, or maybe some specific topic from today's lecture. We could have a short student presentation on something, or if somebody of you has evolved something, or if you want to evolve simulated agents, you could present that next week. That would be great. And so that's the end of lecture 4. Thank you for your attention, and stay tuned for the guest lecture.
So quick introduction to the University of Plymouth University. But first of all, I'll just try to remind you, all the students, that the Koan selection deadline is today at midnight CET. So please do check out the Koan's page on the website. I put a link on the bottom there. And if you can't access the Google Sheets, just email me or one of the other tutors with your choice. And just to let you know that this morning I received two student proposed koans that I will put up on the website within the next couple of hours. So you keep an eye on the list. Back to Plymouth. So this is where we are. We're in the southwest of England, close to Cornwall. You can see France on the other side of the English Channel there. This is how it sometimes looks like. Let's see if the slide comes up. It takes a little bit of time. Okay. Well, there will be a picture soon of Plymouth. There we go. It is not how it looked this morning, but it can certainly look like this at times. So it's a nice little city in the southwest of England. At Plymouth University, we have a very active robotics community, and we do different degrees from bachelor, master, and PhD in robotics, a lot of hands-on robotics, robot football, etc. We are officially part of the Cognition Institute, which is a large interdisciplinary institute in psychology, cognitive science, biology, robotics, etc. Within the Cognition Institute, we have the Center for Robotics and Neural Systems, where we focus on artificial intelligence, humanoid robotics, cognitive robotics, parallel computation, etc. It's quite a large group with more than 30 PhD students and postdocs, and it pulls in quite a lot of funding. These are some of the projects that we have had in the last couple of years and that are still ongoing. And Nathan, if you want to play the video, if you have it there for Plymouth. So this will just go over some of the research that we do. First of all, a little bit of language learning here on the iCub. Only more in the video here. We'll give you a talk on this in 2 weeks' time. Now we'll show a little bit of number learning.
Afterwards, it takes a test where it must tap the button on the right when an even number is presented, and the left one for an odd number.
Again, you can see links to this on the website if you go to GRNs website. Action. And we also do soft robots. This is just a video of what we also work on trying to get these neural networks and artificial intelligence into real autonomous systems, and that's the overview more or less. So if you're ever in Plymouth or in the area, please let us know. We'll welcome you here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I think we had yet another great lecture today. So thank you everybody for attending, and particularly Verena from Berlin for hosting the day. And so see you next week.